The snow fell in heavy, muted waves that Christmas night, soft enough to hide footsteps, but not the weight on Daniel's shoulders. He sat alone on the edge of his small living room couch, the glow of the streetlight spilling through the window and tracing the lines of exhaustion on his face. His phone rested in his hand, no calls, no messages, just the quiet reminder of how silent everything had been. What he didn't know was that this would be the night everything shifted. Hours earlier, he had whispered yet another prayer into a sky that felt too far away. Now he wondered if God had stopped listening, or if he had imagined every moment of closeness he once felt. The heaviness of unanswered months pressed against his chest like a door that refused to open. Outside, distant laughter drifted from families celebrating across the street. Inside, Daniel sat frozen in the stillness, battling a thought he never imagined would cross his heart. Maybe I really am forgotten. A small vibration startled him, a single notification lighting up the screen. His thumb hovered over it, hesitant, unsure why something so ordinary suddenly felt like it carried weight. He almost ignored it, almost set the phone aside and sank deeper into the silence. But this message, simple as it looked, would become the turning point he never saw coming. What Daniel couldn't see was that the answer he had begged for was already unfolding, not in thunder, not in spectacle, but in a quiet way that matched the softness of the night around him, and before dawn he would finally understand that silence was never God's absence. Daniel's life hadn't always felt like this, tight, quiet, hollowed around the edges. Just a year earlier, his days moved with a rhythm that felt almost predictable. He woke before sunrise, brewed his coffee in the tiny kitchen of his second-floor apartment, and walked the same tree-lined street toward the marketing firm where he worked. He liked the steadiness of it, the conversations with co-workers, the projects that made him feel useful, the sense of direction. Back then, if someone had asked him how he was doing, he would have said, "I'm fine," and meant it. But everything shifted 3 months ago when the company downsized. He remembered the meeting, the polite tone, the apologetic glances, the phrase, "restructuring was unavoidable," and then the walk home carrying the box of belongings that suddenly felt heavier than it looked. That night, he sat alone on his porch steps, staring at the quiet neighborhood. He tried to pray, but the words tangled inside him. Still, he whispered a soft, humble line, "Lord, I trust you, even if I don't understand this." It was his first act of worship after the loss. Simple, trembling, sincere. He thought clarity would come quickly, but days became weeks. Applications went unanswered. Interviews dissolved into silence. His savings thinned, and with every passing day, the quiet around him grew thicker, as if the world was holding its breath. He tried to keep his routine alive. Morning walks, reading scripture in his living room where sunlight streamed through the blinds. He would sit in the back pew of Grace Hill Church on Sundays, not a grand cathedral, just a wooden room filled with natural morning light and familiar faces. There were no rituals, no symbols, just people singing softly and breathing in hope together. Yet somehow, even in that stillness, he felt disconnected. His sister, Anna, called every week, her voice bright and warm. "Daniel, you're going to get through this," she would say. He loved her optimism, but part of him flinched every time. He didn't want comfort. He wanted guidance. He wanted to hear something. There was also Mr. Hale, the elderly neighbor from across the hall. He walked with a cane and a stubborn determination that made Daniel smile. Whenever they crossed paths in the hallway, Mr. Hale would offer small pieces of wisdom disguised as casual conversation. "Storms aren't the sign you're alone," he once said while unlocking his door. "Sometimes they're the sign you're being moved." Daniel had nodded politely, unsure whether to take it as truth or coincidence. But the real struggle was internal. With each passing day, Daniel felt his confidence slipping through his fingers. the way sand falls apart when you try to hold it too tightly. He wondered if he was failing at faith, if God's silence was a reflection of his own inadequacy. Yet every night he kept praying, not long prayers, not dramatic ones, just small, steady whispers into the dark. Lord, remind me you're near. Father, guide me. Help me hear you. Sometimes he thought he felt peace for a moment, a flicker, then it faded too quickly to hold on to. What he didn't know was that something quiet and gentle had already begun forming beneath the surface. On the morning of Christmas Eve, Daniel woke early and walked through the neighborhood. Families hurried in and out of stores, children carried wrapped gifts, and the town square glowed with strings of lights wrapped around tall pine trees. Something about the season always stirred memories of his childhood, his father's voice telling him, "You have to be strong, Daniel. Stand on your own." He never realized how deeply that shaped him, or how deeply God planned to rewrite it. That evening, back home, he placed his worn Bible on the table and opened it to a passage he'd read 1,000 times. His eyes lingered on a line he usually skimmed over. "Be still and know that I am God." He exhaled slowly, letting it settle in him. A small spark of worship rose again, gentle and unforced. "God, thank you for staying near, even when I can't feel it." He didn't know it yet, but this quiet gratitude would become the thread that pulled him into the moment where everything finally made sense. And just one night later, on Christmas night, God's answer would arrive in a way Daniel never expected. Christmas morning should have felt warm, but Daniel woke with a knot in his chest that refused to loosen. Snow piled along the sidewalks, the world outside quiet and untouched, but inside he felt the stirring ache of another day without answers. Still, determined not to drown in his thoughts, he decided to attend the small Christmas gathering at Grace Hill Church. He hoped the familiar faces might soften the silence he'd been carrying. The sanctuary was simple as always. Wooden beams, sunlight streaming through tall windows, families greeting one another with gentle smiles. No decorations beyond a few wreaths near the doors, no candles, nothing elaborate, just people breathing gratitude into the air. Daniel slipped into a back pew, hoping to blend into the background. But the moment he sat, he overheard two former co-workers talking a few rows ahead, unaware he was there. "Did you hear about Daniel?" one whispered. "He still hasn't found a job. Such a shame. He used to seem so put together." The words hit him like a cold draft sweeping across the room. He wished he hadn't come. The judgment wasn't loud, but it was enough to make him want to disappear. He stared at the floorboards, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. He considered standing up and leaving, but something held him in place. Then the service began, soft singing, voices steady and gentle. Families rose to worship, and Daniel felt exposed among them, as if everyone somehow knew how empty he felt. A part of him wanted to close his eyes and join the worship, but the sting of those whispers clung to him. After the final hymn, Pastor Michael greeted people near the exit. When Daniel approached, the pastor's eyes softened with recognition. "Daniel," he said warmly, "it's good to see you here today." Daniel mustered a nod. "Just trying to stay steady." Pastor Michael didn't push, didn't pry. He simply placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You don't have to hold everything alone." The words landed softly, uncomfortably. Daniel wasn't sure he believed them. As he stepped outside, cold air rushed against his face, sharper than he expected. He wrapped his coat tightly around him and began walking home. Halfway there, his phone buzzed. For a heartbeat, he hoped maybe a job callback, maybe good news. But when he checked, his heart sank. A message from a former co-worker. "I heard what happened. I hope you can get back on your feet soon." No malice, just pity, the kind that stings worse than outright cruelty. He stopped on the sidewalk, snowflakes landing on his coat. He felt small, smaller than he had felt in months. A wave of embarrassment washed over him, not just for losing his job, but for the way people now looked at him, as though he was shrinking into someone he never meant to become. For the first time since the downsizing, he couldn't hold it in. He exhaled shakily, whispering under his breath, "God, I'm trying, I really am." He didn't realize someone was approaching until a gentle voice called out, "Daniel!" It was Mr. Hale, leaning carefully on his cane, his breath fogging in the cold. "You all right, son?" Daniel nodded, but the old man saw straight through the thin mask. "Hard days can make you believe lies about yourself," Mr. Hale said softly. "But storms don't get the final word." Daniel swallowed, unsure whether to accept the comfort or shrug it away. He managed a quiet "thank you," though his voice trembled around the edges. He continued home, feeling the weight of the day pressing down harder with each step. What he didn't know was that this moment, the humiliation, the sting of pity, the ache of feeling seen in the wrong way, was not the breaking point. She thought this was the worst. It wasn't. The real turning point was still waiting for him, only hours away, wrapped inside a message that would reach deeper than any wound those whispers left behind. And it would come on Christmas night. The afternoon stretched long and grey, the kind of winter stillness that made every sound echo. Daniel sat at his kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of warm tea that had already begun to cool. The morning's humiliation replayed in his mind, looping in sharp fragments, the whispers, the pitying message, the way he felt suddenly small in a world he once navigated confidently. He tried to shake it off, but the weight clung to him. A soft knock at the door broke the quiet. When Daniel opened it, Mr. Hale stood there, bundled in his thick coat, snowflakes caught in the wool of his scarf. "I figured you might need company," the older man said with a faint smile. "Walk with me a moment." Daniel hesitated, then nodded. The hallway was dim but calm, and together they stepped outside into the crisp winter air. Snow crunched beneath their steps as they slowly made their way toward the small park across the street, the branches above them dusted white. They sat on a bench, the world around them hushed by the snowfall. For a while, neither spoke. Daniel appreciated that. Silence with another person felt different from silence with God. It didn't accuse him, didn't taunt him, it just existed. Finally, Mr. Hale exhaled. "You know," he said quietly, "people misunderstand God's silence. They think it means he's far." Daniel stared at the ground, letting the words sink in. The old man continued, "But silence is often when he's working the deepest." Daniel swallowed. "It doesn't feel that way." "I know," Mr. Hale said, his eyes gentle, "but feelings aren't the compass. Faith is." He paused, tapping his cane lightly in the snow. "Your father taught you to stand on your own, didn't he?" Daniel looked up, startled. "How did you know that?" "I can see it in the way you carry yourself. You walk like a man expecting to weather storms alone." He turned toward Daniel. "But that's not the way God meant for you to live. Strength isn't isolation, it's surrender." The words landed like a soft light breaking into a dark room. Daniel's chest tightened, and before he could stop himself, he whispered, "Lord, guide me. I don't want to walk this alone anymore." It wasn't loud, it wasn't eloquent, but it was the truest prayer he had spoken in months. Mr. Hale nodded, as if he felt the shift inside Daniel. "I don't know what answer you're waiting for," he said, "but I do know this. God hasn't forgotten you. Sometimes he waits for us to stop trying so hard to earn what he already promised." They sat in silence again, but this time something inside Daniel softened. A quiet uncoiling, a loosening of the tight, self-made armor he'd been wearing for years. Snow fell lightly around them, and Daniel felt just for a moment a small warmth inside his chest. Not an answer, not a breakthrough, but a hint of something approaching. What he couldn't see was that tonight, Christmas night, God's voice would find him in the most unexpected way. A message was already being written, a truth already moving toward him, a revelation that would rewrite everything. As Daniel walked back to his apartment, the quiet of the evening pressed gently around him. Something inside had shifted, just slightly, but enough to make him breathe differently. The snowflakes drifted like soft reminders that even silence could carry meaning. And what he didn't know was that the next part of his story was about to unfold in a way he couldn't predict. Before we step into that moment, if this journey is touching your heart, I'd love for you to stay with us. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from, your city, your country. Stories like this reach further when we walk through them together. Now, let's go back to Daniel, because the first sign of God's answer was already on its way, waiting just beyond the edge of his doubt. Evening settled slowly over the neighborhood, brushing the rooftops with fading streaks of gold. Daniel returned to his apartment with footsteps lighter than they had been that morning, though he wasn't sure why. Something Mr. Hale said kept echoing in his mind. Strength isn't isolation, it's surrender. The words lingered like a quiet melody he couldn't shake. He made himself a simple dinner, sat at the small wooden table and tried to read, but his mind wandered, drifting between memories of his father and the prayer he'd whispered earlier. He didn't feel healed, just open, the way soil softens after months of frost. What he didn't know was that his first sign was minutes away. A soft buzz from his phone made him look over instinctively. He almost ignored it. Probably another automated holiday message, but something nudged him to pick it up. It was from Anna. His sister never texted this late. He opened the message slowly, expecting a cheerful "Merry Christmas" or a photo of her kids by the tree, but instead there was just one sentence. Daniel, I don't know why, but I feel like I need to remind you of something Dad used to say. Daniel's breath caught. And then the second message arrived. He always told you, be strong, yes, but you never heard the rest of it. He used to say it to me too. Be strong, because God walks with you even when you can't see him. Daniel stared at the screen, stunned. He had never heard that second part, never, not once in his entire life. A memory flickered. His father standing by the old barn, hands on his hips, the wind pushing through the tall grass. Daniel remembered the tone, the firmness, the expectation, but he never remembered those last words. He never heard them. It felt impossible. The room felt suddenly still, as if the air itself had leaned in. He typed back, "When did he ever say that?" Anna replied, "All the time. I don't know why he didn't say it to you. Maybe you were too young. Maybe he forgot. But tonight it felt important to tell you." A gentle tremor moved through Daniel's chest. The timing was too precise, too piercing, too aligned with the ache he had carried for years. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't a miracle in the sky. It wasn't a booming voice splitting clouds. It was a sentence, a forgotten truth, a small string pulled at the exact moment his soul began to loosen. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Tears didn't come, not yet, but something warm pressed behind his ribs. For the first time in months, he felt seen, not by people. By God, he whispered under his breath, barely audible. Thank you, I needed that. It wasn't the full answer. It wasn't the whole picture. But it was the first sign, a soft turning of the page. And though Daniel didn't know it yet, this gentle shift was only the beginning, because before the night ended, a second trial would strike, sharper, heavier, frightening enough to make him doubt all over again. But that second trial would lead him straight into the moment God had been preparing all along. Night deepened over the city, the snow now falling in thin, restless lines instead of the gentle flakes from earlier. Daniel set his phone down slowly, still absorbing Anna's message. For the first time in months, a fragile thread of hope tugged at him, light, delicate, but real. He didn't know that within the hour, that thread would be tested harder than anything before. A sudden knock at the door startled him, not a gentle, neighborly knock, a sharp, urgent one. Daniel's heart jumped. He opened the door to find his landlord, Mr. Collins, standing there with a clipboard tucked under his arm. His voice was apologetic but firm. "Daniel, I'm really sorry to bring this up tonight, but the office finally reviewed your extension request." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "And I tried to push it through, but..." Collins sighed. "They can't approve another month. You're 2 months behind. I have to give you the notice." He handed Daniel a folded paper. Eviction. Daniel stared at the word as if it were written in fire. "Mr. Collins," he said quietly, "I'm doing everything I can. I've been applying non-stop. I just need a little more time." The landlord softened. He wasn't cruel, just bound by rules. "I know, Daniel, I truly do, but the company won't move this time. You have until the end of next week. Next week, 7 days. A cold rush spread through Daniel's body. "End of next week. That's too soon," Collins finished gently. "I'm sorry." Daniel nodded numbly and closed the door. The moment it clicked shut, the weight crashed over him like a collapsing wall. His knees weakened, and he gripped the edge of the kitchen counter just to stay upright. For a few seconds, he couldn't breathe. All the progress he felt earlier, all the warmth from Anna's message, all the subtle hope, it evaporated under the crushing fear pressing against his ribs. He paced the room, trying to think, trying to breathe, trying to remember the peace he'd felt just hours before. But the fear was louder, much louder. "What am I supposed to do now?" he whispered into the empty room. Outside, wind slammed against the windows. The world felt suddenly harsh, raw winter settling in like an unwelcome guest. He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The quiet apartment, once a place of routine and familiarity, now felt like a ticking clock. Every second that passed felt like another grain of sand slipping through his fingers. He grabbed his laptop and opened job sites again, desperation pushing his hands to move faster. He applied to everything. Positions he wasn't qualified for, roles he'd never considered, anything that looked like a lifeline. But with each click, discouragement deepened. Half the listings said closed. The others required experience he didn't have. His chest tightened again. His breath grew shallow. It felt like failure was stalking him from every corner. And in that moment, Daniel almost broke. Almost gave in to the fear, almost believed the lie that he was abandoned after all. But something small stopped him. A quiet thought, a whisper he didn't fully understand yet. "Don't run. Not this time." He closed the laptop slowly. His heart still raced. Fear still clawed at him, but he lifted his head. This wasn't the end, not yet, even if everything in him screamed otherwise. He stood, breathing carefully, grounding himself the way he used to before presentations at work. He wasn't strong, but he was standing. He didn't know it, but this moment, this fragile, trembling stance, was the doorway to the climax God had been shaping since the very first prayer. Because before Christmas night ended, Daniel was about to hear God speak more clearly than he ever had in his life, not through rescue, not through escape, but through revelation. Snow thickened outside Daniel's window, turning the world into a blur of white and shadow. Inside the apartment, the eviction notice lay on the table like a threat waiting to devour the last of his peace. His heartbeat was uneven, his thoughts tangled, but something inside him refused to fully collapse. A thin, trembling strand of courage held him upright. He paced the living room, breathing through the fear. "Don't run," the quiet thought repeated. "Not this time." The message from Anna still glowed softly on his phone screen. His eyes drifted back to it again and again, drawn by the strange timing, the unexpected warmth hidden inside her words. Be strong, because God walks with you even when you can't see him. He whispered it under his breath, tasting each word like it carried weight he hadn't noticed before. Then, another buzz. A new message from Anna. Daniel, I forgot to say this. Dad used to tell me something else too. When you feel lost, help someone else find their way. God meets you there. The words hit him like a spark in the dark. Suddenly, a memory surfaced, one he hadn't visited in years. He saw himself as a boy, standing beside his father on a frosty morning, both of them watching their neighbor struggle to fix a broken fence after a storm. Without hesitation, his father had stepped over and said, "Let's help him, son," and young Daniel had followed. He remembered the warmth afterward, the quiet satisfaction, the sense of purpose. He hadn't felt that in months. The realization landed hard, clear, undeniable. He had been praying for God to speak, but he had never stopped long enough to see where God was pointing. Daniel's breath steadied. His fear didn't vanish, but it shifted, making room for something deeper, stronger. Purpose began forming in the cracks of his exhaustion. He grabbed his coat, slipping it on with trembling hands. The apartment was still cold, the notice still real, but he stepped toward the door. For the first time in months, he was moving with intention. He crossed the hall and knocked gently on Mr. Hale's door. After a moment, the old man opened it, eyebrows lifting in surprise. "Daniel, it's late." "I know," Daniel said, his voice low but steady. "But do you need anything? Groceries? Help with something? I felt like I shouldn't wait." Mr. Hale blinked, touched by the unexpected offer. "Actually, I could use a hand tomorrow. The snow's blocked part of my walkway." "I'll take care of it," Daniel said instantly, "first thing in the morning." A quiet warmth filled the hallway, small but unmistakable. As Daniel walked back to his apartment, a clarity settled in him like a flame being gently lit inside his chest. Not a loud revelation, not a dramatic miracle. Just a truth arriving exactly when he needed it. God had been guiding him all along, through whispers, through memories, through people, through purpose. He stood still in the center of his living room, snow continuing to fall outside, and breathed a simple prayer. "God, I see you, thank you. Show me how to walk this out." What he didn't know yet was that the next part, the redemption, was already unfolding, waiting to flood his life with the answer he had been longing for since the first day he cried out in silence. Tonight, clarity had finally found him, and it was only the beginning. Morning arrived quietly, the world wrapped in a soft blanket of snow that made everything look renewed. Daniel stepped outside early, shovel in hand, the air crisp enough to sting his lungs. For the first time in months, he wasn't moving out of fear or desperation. He was moving out of purpose. He cleared Mr. Hale's walkway slowly but steadily, snow crunching with each push. The older man watched from the doorway, wrapped in a heavy coat, gratitude softening his eyes. "You didn't have to come this early," Mr. Hale said. Daniel smiled lightly. "I wanted to—" As he worked, something in his chest loosened. He felt grounded, present, useful, almost whole. It wasn't a job offer or a sudden miracle, but it was something deeper, God's presence resting quietly in the simplicity of serving someone else. By the time he finished, sunlight had begun breaking through the clouds, painting gold across the snow. Daniel wiped his brow, letting the warmth settle over him like a gentle promise. And then his phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket, expecting a message from Anna, but instead he saw the name of a company he'd applied to weeks ago, one he assumed had forgotten him. His breath caught as he opened the email. We'd like to schedule an interview with you as soon as possible. Your portfolio stood out to our team. For a moment, the world seemed to still. Snowflakes drifted lazily past him, sparkling in the sunlight. Relief, disbelief, and gratitude rose in him like a tide he couldn't hold back. He whispered right there in the cold, "God, thank you for hearing me even when I thought you were silent." His voice was steady, humbled, full of quiet awe. He walked back to his apartment with a lighter step, his heart swelling with a sense of direction he thought he'd lost forever. Inside, the eviction notice was still on the table, but now it looked less like a threat and more like a temporary shadow. He wasn't alone. He wasn't forgotten. He wasn't wandering without guidance. God had led him through silence, not to punish him, but to prepare him. Later that afternoon, Daniel called Anna, his voice warm and full of life she hadn't heard in months. He told her about the interview, the clarity, the morning with Mr. Hale. She cried softly, saying she knew God was holding him the whole time, and Daniel believed it. With every passing hour, his fear loosened and his gratitude grew, filling the spaces where doubt once lived. This was redemption. Not dramatic, not noisy, but gentle and unmistakably divine. God had spoken, and Daniel's heart had finally heard him. The next step was already forming in his spirit, ready to shape the legacy that would follow. The days that followed carried a rhythm Daniel hadn't felt in a long time. His interview went well, far better than he expected. The hiring manager appreciated his honesty, his portfolio, and the resilience he'd developed over the past months. 2 days later, the phone call came. He got the job. Relief washed over him, not rushed or frantic, but deep and steady, like a tide returning to shore. He wouldn't lose his apartment. He wouldn't drown under the weight of uncertainty. The storm had passed, but more importantly, something inside him had changed. He still visited Mr. Hale every morning, even after the snow melted. They shared warm conversations over simple breakfasts, and Daniel found joy in these moments, unexpected gifts stitched into the quiet corners of life. What began as a desperate act of purpose slowly became a calling, and he didn't stop there. One evening, he walked through the neighborhood and realized how many people lived alone, seniors in small apartments, single parents juggling too much, young adults fighting silent battles. Faces he'd passed for years without noticing now stirred something in him. He felt a gentle nudge in his spirit. Helping others wasn't a task. It was the place where God had been waiting for him all along. By spring, Daniel had started a small community group. Nothing formal, nothing grand, just weekly gatherings in the local park, sharing meals, listening to each other's stories, showing up for those who needed company. No rituals, no pressure, just presence. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, Daniel stood watching the group laugh and talk, people who once felt invisible now finding connection. Something warm rose in his chest. Gratitude, worship, recognition of God's quiet guidance. He closed his eyes for a moment and whispered softly, "God, you are good." It wasn't a dramatic prayer, just a simple acknowledgement that every step, every silence, every struggle, every shift had been leading him here. Legacy wasn't something Daniel planned. It unfolded naturally, born from the night God finally spoke. And from that night on, Daniel lived with a new kind of strength, not the strength of standing alone, but the strength of walking with God, one quiet step at a time. In the end, Daniel learned what so many hearts discover only after walking through silence. God's quiet is not distance, it is formation. It is the gentle shaping of a soul, learning to trust what it cannot yet see. The answers we seek rarely arrive in noise or spectacle. More often, they come in the soft turning of the heart, in acts of kindness, in memories restored, in doors opened at just the right time. God speaks in ways we often overlook, through people, through peace, through purpose rediscovered. And when the moment finally comes, clarity feels less like a sudden miracle and more like a truth that had been waiting patiently within us. Daniel's story reminds us that even in long seasons of stillness, God is moving. Even in unanswered prayers, He is guiding. Even in our hardest nights, He is near. Everything had a purpose. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you of something simple and powerful. Even when life feels silent, God is still speaking, gently, patiently, faithfully, and just like Daniel, you are being guided in ways you may not see yet. But one day you will look back and understand the purpose behind it all. If you felt God whisper to you through this video, I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story of faith, hope, and restoration. And before you go, share with us in the comments. From which city and country are you watching? Your presence here matters, and your story is welcome. May God bless you and keep guiding your steps, one quiet moment at a time.